Okay, so I would like to welcome everyone for attending this NOBCChE webinar. Before we actually begin, I would just like to give a couple updates. The abstracts and travel grant submission has been extended to September 12th. Also, make sure to register for the 43rd Annual NOBCChE Conference held in Raleigh, North Carolina. During the webinar, if there are any questions, they can be directed to the YouTube page comment section or on the Twitter. So at this time, I would like to introduce our speaker for today.
Hello.
Yes. Yes, our speaker for today is Chairperson Vanessa Sutherland from the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board. Vanessa Allen Sutherland was nominated by President Barack Obama to the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board in March of 2015 and confirmed by the Senate in August of 2015. Prior to her appointment, Sutherland served as the Chief Counselor for the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration at the U.S. Department of Transportation, whose mission is to protect people and the environment from the risks associated with hazardous material transportation. Prior to this, Ms. Sutherland spent 7 years at Fortune 25 Philip Morris Altria Client Service in Richmond, Virginia. She managed technology transactions, procurement matters, data security and privacy, competitive intelligence, U.S. customs issues, state and federal audits, and issues related to reorganization, dissolution, and spin-off of international entities. In 2012, she was the recipient of the U.S. Secretary and Transportation Award at the 45th Annual Secretary's Award after only a year in her new position and 2 Secretary's Awards in 2014. So at this time, I would like to open the floor to our presenter, Chairperson Vanessa Allen Sutherland.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. It's very exciting to be able to talk about the Chemical Safety Board. I just celebrated my first year, August the 11th, so just about a week ago today, as a matter of fact. This presentation is really to help highlight for anyone within NOBCChE who's unfamiliar with the CSB who we are at a high level, but also to describe some of the chemical safety issues that we are focused on for this fiscal year and probably when our strategic plan is completed for the next 5 years. Am I advancing the slides myself, or should I say next slide? Next slide, okay, great, let me do that.
We're in control of the slides.
Wonderful, I have it. So today's agenda is going to be, as I mentioned, after a description of the Chemical Safety Board and information on our Drivers of Chemical Safety Change program, a brief overview of one of the recent cases that we did, West Fertilizer investigation, which those who are in Texas, I'm sure, heard a lot about this in 2013 when it happened, and it spurred a lot of federal government activity. And our report reflects a lot of key emergency response reforms. The CSB is very much like the NTSB. We were in fact modeled off of the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. We're an independent, non-regulatory and non-enforcement federal agency whose charge is to investigate industrial incidents at fixed facilities. And that is a very specific mandate that arose out of the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. All of the board members, we can have up to 5, although we currently have 4. The board members are appointed by the president, as you heard in the biography section and confirmed by the Senate, the CSB, with oversight from those board members, conducts root cause investigations of chemical incidents. And when our reports of those incidents are done, we publish a final product to share those lessons. And as I mentioned, the agency doesn't issue fines or citations because it's non-regulatory, but it does make recommendations to chemical plants, to other agencies that are regulatory, such as OSHA or EPA. We make recommendations to industry organizations and trade associations, or in some instances, labor groups and unions. And one of the reasons that we focus so heavily on recommendations is it's the primary mechanism that we have to achieve change. In the absence of enforcement or regulations, our core mechanism for sharing our lessons is to help people understand where critical chemical safety change is needed and where we think we might be able to affect broad national scale change. So there are several elements to the program, and I'm going to go through these fairly quickly because it's a little bit more art than science. We identify the most important chemical safety improvement goals of the CSB, and of course that changes based on what is happening in the chemical industry, what's happening in the United States in the way of energy and environment. So there are a variety of different things that might highlight what's important at a specific time. We also pursue implementation of changes that are most likely to advance chemical safety. So as I'll mention in a moment, if we think that there is an opportunity for national level change, whether that's regulatory or standards development, or various states who would be affected, or broad industry process improvement, we want to look at that so that we can affect the broadest number possible. We also use this program to focus special advocacy efforts by the board members and staff. We are a fairly small agency. We have $11 million and 40 people. And in that resource management, we want to make sure that the board members and staff are advocating for issues that we are seeing very often or that we think have a broad impact on the environment and people. We also use the program to try to inform deployment decisions. Part of the process for us investigating chemical incidents is to determine where we may need to deploy. If we've seen an incident many times, such as a hot work event or another type of process safety management deficiency, maybe non-routine maintenance being inadequately carried out, then we would factor that into our deployment decision. If an item is on our Drivers of Chemical Safety Change program list, then we want to make sure we're allocating our resources to go to those incidents that can help us learn more and potentially provide even additional data to industry and others to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. So the four current items that we have on our program list are listed on the screen in the top right boxes. OSHA's combustible dust standard, modernizing the U.S. process safety management regulations, emergency planning and response, and preventive maintenance. And you'll note that on the top it says Most Wanted Safety Improvement Program. When we started this program a couple of years ago, it was also modeled off of the NTSB. And I encourage you to visit our website because it will be changing with our new name and potentially updating the focus areas for the upcoming fiscal year. But the first issue, which is combustible dust, is really born out of a lot of investigations that we saw where the hazards of combustible dust were not well known, and its likelihood to ignite and cause severe explosions and resulting damage, we felt was a major safety challenge. Our recommendations arose from the CSB's combustible dust study, as well as its investigation into the 2008 explosions and fire at Imperial Sugar, which was a refinery in Port Wentworth, Georgia. Anyone on the phone who lived in Georgia might remember that. It was a fairly significant event. 3 dust-related incidents at Haganese Corporation in Gallatin, Tennessee were also investigated by us, and a fatal metal dust accident at the AL Solutions facility in New Cumberland, West Virginia, all highlighted that the loss of life and the catastrophic effect on the facility following these explosions were pretty really disturbing. Second, modernizing the U.S. process safety management regulations. For a lot of engineers and chemists, at least those who I have met here and at other federal agencies, process safety management wasn't really part of the curriculum in the engineering programs. And if it was more of an integrated subset of a module. So it wasn't necessarily a standalone topic. And one of the things that we have been very excited about is hearing from engineers and others who are in the workforce that process safety and engineering really do go hand in hand. But this particular item is for recommendations that stem from a number of CSB cases, including our Improving Reactive Hazard Management Study, the Motiva Refinery Investigation Report, a very well-known multi-year investigation, and BP Texas City investigation, as well as Tesoro Anacortes, a Chevron Richmond refinery fire, and many others that I think provide a basis for companies to have their engineers and chemists, and quite frankly, a variety of different types of engineers, work on process safety and identifying the hazards, developing appropriate risk mechanisms, and constantly being involved in continual learning. And the last two, emergency planning and response, we're going to focus a lot of our board member and staff attention on this particular topic because, as I'll explain as an example in a moment, we have seen in 14 CSB investigations that there are significant deficiencies in how companies communicate their hazards and emergency plans to the community, to the first responders, and first responders often may arrive at the scenes of these really catastrophic incidents, not knowing what to expect, not knowing what materials may be needed, such as fire or foam, to help address the resulting explosions or fire, not knowing when to let it burn and evacuate. And so there are a lot of very complex issues that we've investigated in West Fertilizer, MFG Chemical Inc., which was a toxic gas release, a Herrig Brothers farm propane tank explosion way back in 1998. So these issues are recurring fairly frequently, and we wanted to make sure we're amplifying our lessons learned to share with people. And then lastly, for preventive maintenance, for those who are in the design, construction, and maintenance area, or if that's a passion, our investigations in this area include the Tesoro Refinery fatal explosion and fire in Anacortes, Washington, which was just a few years ago. That was 2010. And the Chevron refinery fire in Richmond, California in 2012. These are areas where we believe the consequences certainly could have been mitigated. And in some instances, I think we'd be as strong as to say the incident itself could have been avoided if people did adequate turnarounds of their facilities, preventive maintenance, appropriate testing, and documentation. So these are the issues that I and my fellow board members will be advocating as we travel to conferences throughout the U.S. and internationally. I hope to make it to my first NOBCChE conference in November, and also hear more about what is being done in these areas in the way of R&D and innovation. So as I mentioned, considerations for inclusion in the program cover a lot of different grounds. We look at the nature and risk, the nature of the risk and estimated extent of exposure to the workers, including contractors at a site, the surrounding neighborhoods. We also look at previous loss and potential for future losses that involve the type of hazard or chemical or process that we have placed as a focus area. And then obviously we want to make sure that when there are very high risks that disproportionately affect discrete but highly identifiable groups, that we are focused on those areas. I mean, some people might think of this a subset of this is environmental justice, or we could think of it as narrow sectors of industry that have unique risk profiles. But we do want to make sure that if it's novel or if they're extremely high risks, that we do give greater attention to that to help companies and communities mitigate some of those risks. And lastly, if there's a strong concern about important sectors of the community, civic leaders that we have maybe not fully identified a certain area, and there's an interest in us looking at something novel, and the possibility that advocacy would then bring about change because there's either political or community interest, we certainly will factor that in to how we approach our advocacy efforts, and including items on our most wanted, now called drivers of chemical safety change list. So one of the things I wanted to highlight, particularly for those who are not as familiar with the Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board, is an item that is on the list, emergency planning and response. And I thought I might illustrate this by describing West Fertilizer, which I think it's recent enough that many may have heard of it. It was the fire and explosion at an ammonium nitrate plant in West Texas that killed 15 people, 12 of whom were emergency responders in a very, very horrible explosion when the ammonium nitrate detonated. And I use this as an example, not just to explain how broadly the Chemical Safety Board's investigations are, but for those who may be interested in using their experience and time either at companies or in academia to work on some of these issues. I believe that safety is clearly a shared responsibility, and we all have a way that we can contribute to mitigating the loss of life and devastating loss of property. So our investigations, as I mentioned, have looked at 14 investigations, and they all found, those 14 found that inadequate or poor emergency planning or response was a root cause of the consequences that arose after an incident happened. Our early investigations, as well as more recent investigations, had very similar findings. And highlighting the one that I just mentioned, West, which was the fire and explosion at a fertilizer blending and retail distribution facility, we learned that there were common themes. So the facts for anyone who needs a refresher are that blast destroyed the West Fertilizer facility and caused widespread damage to more than 150 off-site buildings, which over the 50 years that the facility had been present in West had built up closer and closer to the corporate facility. The construction of bins and other building materials at the facility, as well as a lack of automatic sprinkler system, plausibly contributed to the detonation of the fertilizer-grade ammonium nitrate, although none have been able to pinpoint exactly specifically what caused the detonation. Some of the key contributing factors to the challenges at West, which ultimately resulted in the loss of life and at last count about $260 million in property damage and environmental damage, were lack of incident command system, lack of an incident management system, inadequate hazmat or non-existent hazmat training of some of the emergency responders who showed up at the scene to address the fire, no pre-incident planning. There was limited and conflicting technical guidance on Afghan fertilizer-grade ammonium nitrate. And one of the things that we wanted to highlight as a sub-issue was that it led to inconsistent firefighting measures. Some might have said, if there's an ammonium nitrate, whether it's fertilizer grade or technical grade, that you want to avoid the area, evacuate, and really make sure that people let the fire burn, versus trying to treat the fire and ultimately risk the ammonium nitrate detonating. So that was a key finding. And we made certain recommendations following that. One was that there should be funding mechanisms to provide training on Afghan fires. They may behave differently. You never know when there's going to be a detonation or explosion. and training first responders and others to know that it is a possibility that there would be a detonation, and that it may be best just to evacuate the area and get people to safety, is something that was really helpful. But there was no funding, and our final report made a number of recommendations to address some of these deficiencies. We also recommended that training and certification on response to Afghan fires and hazardous materials fires be developed and include a use of pre-incident planning. NFPA already has, the National Fire Protection Association already has pre-incident planning requirements and guidance. And so one of the things that I think we ultimately wanted to highlight is that there are mechanisms for pre-incident planning. It needs to be done adequately, but to the extent people require additional training on how to do that sufficiently, that we needed to make sure the firefighters and associations responsible for this training and certification knew that. Outreach programs to disseminate information on the training programs was lacking, and we made a recommendation that outreach programs be adequately and sufficiently active to disseminate information so that first responders, particularly volunteer fire departments, receive information on training. I should have noted that in West, the volunteer fire department that responded is like many rural communities, and that means they have other positions, they have other jobs, and the volunteer firefighting that they do to help keep their neighbors and colleagues safe is often in addition to their primary job responsibilities. And if there's not enough time or funding, or they don't have the ability to take off of their primary job to go someplace else for training and funding, often they are not getting the skills refresher and skills development that they may need in the event of a major event like West Fertilizer's Afghan explosion. So I wanted to close with key emergency response reforms that we have also made to EPA, OSHA, and Cal EPA, or that they were undertaking on their own for improvements to their regulatory frameworks. And then I would certainly welcome Q&A and any brief discussion about what I've talked about or questions about the Chemical Safety Board. But I focus on these emergency response reforms because one of the things that we do at the national and state level is sometimes we make recommendations for regulatory improvements or at least a review of current regulations to determine if they are adequate or if they are ambiguous. Often these federal agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency or Occupational Safety and Health Administration are already involved in their own enforcement action, so they see where companies or communities may have deficiencies. EPA issued a proposed rule entitled Accident Release Prevention Requirements, Risk Management Programs under the Clean Air Act, Section 112R7. I wish I had a fun acronym for you, for anyone who's reading that, but it is a proposed rule that is still awaiting final publication, but it includes more robust requirements for information sharing, communication, and coordination on emergency planning between facilities and local emergency response officials, which, as I mentioned, not just in the West Fertilizer example, but in many of the cases and accidents that the Chemical Safety Board has investigated, the lack of understanding of what the hazards were, what types of chemicals and their chemical compositions were at the facility, how those might behave in a fire or following a fire, and what types of materials and other firefighting equipment might be necessary, often is an undercommunicated or inadequately communicated set of facts. And so one of the things that we like about this is anytime the community and the emergency response officials can discuss the full scope of hazards and how they might be mitigated in the event of a fire, explosion, or other catastrophe is great. OSHA plans to revise its regulations. For any of you who are potentially interested in process safety management, more specifically, 1910 lays out a lot of the different process safety management regulatory requirements. They plan to revise a specific regulation, 1910.156, to replace the fire brigade rule with a broader rule. And the regulation would intend to set requirements for planning, training, worker health and fitness, and vehicle operations. But again, that is not a final rule at this point, and some may know rulemaking can take quite a bit of time given the notice and comment period and then ultimate time to publish and take effect. Lastly, at the state level, Cal EPA, the California Environmental Protection Agency, which is one of the states who's designated under the federal EPA to have its own program, they've proposed 2 new rules for refineries in particular in its California Accidental Release Prevention Program, and that would require emergency response coordination between refineries and unified program agencies. One of the things, if you go to our website, you will note is that we, the CSB, have spent a significant amount of time in California, not just doing refinery investigations like those at Exxon or Tesoro or Chevron, but working very closely with Cal EPA, California's Department of Industrial Relations, and several other very interested associations or community organizations as they begin to develop much more robust process safety management requirements that go beyond just emergency response in the state. And a lot of engineering, environmental, chemist, organizational consultant expertise has been involved in that process. So for any who are in California or seek to be or who want to go work in their industries, it's really a very exciting time when it comes to how engineering and process safety management intersect or may intersect as we watch the final disposition of these federal and state rules and see what form they will ultimately take when they are passed. So with that, I will open the floor up to question, comment, because I think I was told many may not be deeply familiar with the Chemical Safety Board, and I definitely welcomed the invitation to talk about an example of our work, how we try to promote chemical safety change, and in the future, how we hope to partner with a lot of organizations like NOBCChE for shared messages, learning more about R&D development, innovation in the chemical industry, and being able to share some of our lessons learned about these catastrophic incidents so that no one ever has to work in a place where these types of accidents happen. So with that, I have our website up. We are on YouTube. We have several very well-known, actually very world awarded. We have several video awards for the videos that we do that summarize our investigative work. We are also on Twitter and Facebook, and so if you have time, you may be able to take a look on those at some of our current video work, which is a very layman's term, but very well done by our team, summary of some of these complex engineering and safety events that provide a lot of lessons and I think are the groundwork for training both here and internationally for a lot of the workforce. So please take a look at those. They are very well done, and everywhere I go, they are heralded as probably one of the best things about the CSB. So hopefully you'll take a look at those. So with that, I'll open the floor up for questions.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, so we have a question. What types of careers in science are available with the CSB, and what kinds of degrees are necessary?
That is a great question. We have a very broad list of degrees that are applicable at the CSB, and that is because the investigators who work at the Chemical Safety Board are from a variety of disciplines, and we need that breadth of discipline to approach incidents. For example, we investigated the Deepwater Horizon Macondo oil rig incident. I know many of you are very familiar with that. Hopefully none were adversely affected by that multi-day/week crude oil spill, which left Louisiana and many places really unfamiliar with oil rig operations, very familiar after that about the consequences, environmental and other consequences of those kinds of explosions, and it killed 11 people. In that investigation, that's probably an exemplary view into our expertise. A mechanical engineer, a safety culture, organizational/human factors expert, chemical engineer. We actually have lawyers who are investigators. They're attorneys by training, but many of them have undergraduate degrees in chemistry, engineering as well. And when I say engineering, we do, as I mentioned, have a broad scope of engineering: chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, etc. And so all of those people and expertise are placed on an investigative team, which is usually about 3 to 6 people, given the magnitude of an event. And we hope that they bring to bear their different levels of expertise, although they are united by a common expertise, and that is root cause investigation and analysis training. So the types of careers here are: you can be an investigator who not only would go out and collect evidence, analyze it, and ultimately help to draft a report. You could also be in one of the support, or I'll call them staff functions at the Chemical Safety Board, and that is helping to do the research, whether that's in a legal capacity or technical capacity, but helping to do the research that also goes into our reports. But we like the breadth of experience here, and I think it really helps us approach root cause investigations without having any blind spots, because everybody gets to bring their different level of expertise to the accident.
Okay, the next question: does the coverage of your services span to larger companies, or can it be contracted out to smaller, lower level companies?
Well, we actually, because we're an independent federal agency, we don't contract out anything. The work that we do in the hopes of telling companies how an accident happened is for their benefit, but really it's for everyone who had a role in that accident. So for example, when we investigated West ultimately went out of business, but we made recommendations to trade associations, emergency response, firefighting training organizations, regulators. So our independence doesn't really allow us to work for or with anyone unless it's in a collaborative space, because we want our reports to be objective, root cause summaries that no one can say were tainted by a particular company or a particular stakeholder. So we don't really contract anything out. We do work with contractors to supplement our skill set. If we need a metallurgical specialist, a metallurgist, then we might hire a contractor to help us complete a report, but we do everything independently to assure the credibility of our final product.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What can individuals at the graduate level do to ensure or increase chemical safety in their own laboratories?
Wow, that is one of our favorite questions, and I wish one of my fellow board members here, Dr. Kristen Kolanowski, was present, because she and another one of our employees, Mary Beth Mulcahy, do a lot of panels and conferences for lab safety. For some of you, and I don't know if the person who asked that question knows this about the Chemical Safety Board, but we actually have a safety bulletin that came out in December of 2014 about the rainbow experiment, which has caused a lot of injuries at the high school and collegiate level. At your institutions, the lab safety has not been what I would call our forte, just because in the scheme of things, we have really partnered with or deferred to the universities to make sure that they're safe. But I would say that if you look at that lab safety bulletin that we did on the rainbow experiment, many of the key lessons that we use, such as only using enough of whatever chemical to do your experiment, not using in bulk, making sure that all of the appropriate PPE, personal protective equipment, is worn, making sure that everyone is adequately trained on the safe handling and storage and usage of chemicals in the lab, making sure that when you're doing experiments that involve fire and flame, as in the rainbow experiment, that it's done away from people and, away from a possibility of flashing. Those are the types of things that are in our previous reports. We also investigated the Texas Tech fire. TTU is one of our investigations, and there are a lot of lessons in that as well. So we hope to be out and about this fiscal year and wherever possible discussing these issues at universities or at conferences like the ACC. We were at the annual American Chemistry Council meeting in California, I believe, a few months ago, where Mary Beth Mulcahy and my fellow board member talked about lab safety. So although it's not on our most wanted critical driver safety change, it's still a very important issue. And if you could do all of those things that I described and take a look at our safety bulletin on the rainbow experiment, I think that's a good start in trying to keep people who are in chemical, who are in university chem labs safe or safer.
Okay, what kinds of organizations do you all normally collaborate with?
That's a great question, because we collaborate with everyone. We collaborate with federal agencies. I mentioned a few of those already. State agencies. We collaborate with associations like the American Petroleum Institute, who puts out, for a lot of you, you're going to deal with the standards of building and welding and other things that they publish. A lot of standards developing organizations like the American Fuel and Petrochemical Association, American Chemistry Council. We partner with AICHE and CCPS, which is AICHE. I'm sure many of you know, Global Home of Engineers is their tagline. I'm happy to be a member. And we do panels with them. We're interested in doing op-eds and articles, both at an academic and a more informal level. Where we can, it's always nice during the recommendations portion of our investigations, where we make recommendations to some of these organizations, to partner with them and collaborate on whether the recommendation we are making to them is feasible or technically possible. We also partner, in addition, with what I would consider more non-standards developing organizations and truly corporate entities, groups like ORC, HSE, which deals with health and safety and environmental professionals, or ASSE, the American Society for, what am I missing? Engineers, safety engineers, and they do certifications as well. We just recently developed a new partnership with the Society for Petroleum Engineers and the American Society for Fire Protection Engineers. So there are a lot of different constituents that we might meet when we do an investigation, and it runs the board from professional organizations through to standards developing organizations and every type of other entity that you could think of, including but not limited to corporations themselves and insurance companies and others who provide them with risk management services or safety feedback. Very, very broad scope of, luckily for us, very broad scope of recommendation recipients and therefore stakeholders.
Okay, at this time, that's all the questions that we have. If there are any more questions, they can be directed to the YouTube page for the webinar under the comments section. Unless you have any more comments right now, definitely open it up to you.
I would just close with first thanking everybody. Those were really fantastic questions, and I would direct everyone to careers at CSB on our website. If you go to www.csb.gov, we do put job postings up. This is a very fun place because you get a lot of exposure to different types of chemical industries and investigating those. And then I would lastly say that if you want to receive periodic updates about what's happening with the Chemical Safety Board, meaning accidents or incidents that we are currently investigating or traveling to, then you can sign up on our webpage to receive news updates and news alerts. So we'll be out in the next couple of months. We'll be in West Virginia sharing our report on Freedom Industries, which was the methylcyclohexane methanol released into the Elk River back in 2013. So if you sign up now, you'll be able to hear a lot about some of our upcoming work in the next month when we are out in the field sharing some of those investigative findings. But I'd just like to thank everybody, and please let us know if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you. On behalf of NOBCChE and all of its members, Chairperson Sutherland, we definitely appreciate you taking the time out to give this presentation as well as entertaining all of the questions.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.